We're going to be talking about key ideas that, kind of the continuation of what I spoke about a couple weeks ago when we were looking at this kind of patchwork quilt of various ideas from all of these different sources that fed into what the formation of New Thought, including that original seed idea that originated all the way back to the ancient Vedas. That idea of non-duality. That was kind of the spark of it. And then we talked about Plato and his theory of forms, this idea that reality is found only in the invisible and that all visible forms are simply copies or shadows of the real world, and that our senses trap us into this shadowy kind of world. And then we talked about the influence of Buddha and a key idea being this idea that all experience originates in the mind. And the second thing is meditation. The Buddha gave us meditation, which is what we use as a tool to access that invisible realm, that realm of the absolute, right? Remember some of these ideas we were talking about? And then we sort of looked at, really briefly, the teachings of Jesus and how New Thought practitioners were, they had a kind of a different idea than traditional Christians. They sort of looked at it all through this metaphysical lens. They looked at the Bible through this metaphysical lens and saw Jesus as someone who came to help us awaken to the Christ within ourselves. Right? And then we looked at that tremendous influence that the Transcendentalists had on the New Thought movement, that's really where it got started in this country. And the ideas of oneness with all life, the idea that we can have our own direct experience of the divine, the idea that all we really need is within us, an all-sufficiency. So how many of you took one of those passages that I had written out in the handout a couple of weeks ago and meditated on that? All right, well, you have another chance today. I have another series of passages, inspirational passages in the handout that we'll be going over today, and you can take it home and meditate on that. And then also, we sort of explored this idea that, it was sort of my idea, what I'm feeling, that kind of what has happened to New Thought is that those original, powerful, transformational ideas that healed illness, that transformed people's lives, has over time become kind of watered down. So watered down that it just doesn't have the same impact as it once was. But that we are part of a movement that is reclaiming those original ideas and evolving them. Bringing them into this kind of cutting edge of emerging thought. And that this is what I'm calling a newer thought. A newer thought. So continuing on in our journey here, our exploration, early practitioners were wanting a way to take these profound spiritual truths and make them practical. Create a way that they could apply it to their lives. They thought, well, how do I take this idea that all experience originates in the mind? How can I take this expansive idea of oneness? How can I take that expansive idea that reality exists in the invisible? How do I take the truth that the kingdom of God is within me and apply it to my life so that I can heal from this illness that is preventing me from, fully participating in life, and maybe learn some techniques that I can deal with my crazy family, or get out of debt and, experience a more abundant life. I mean, if it's not practical, they thought, it's just theory. Nice sounding ideas, maybe really great to meditate on. But if I can't pay my bills and I'm too sick to leave the house and I have an impossible living situation, how do those lofty ideas really serve me? And so the answer began to emerge from a very unexpected source. So around in the early to mid 1800s, in New England, where kind of the birth of the New Thought movement, mesmerism was all the rage. Mesmerism. Yeah. And in fact, the word mesmerism came from the guy in Vienna, Anton Mesmer, who was doing experiments on putting people into a trance-like state and giving them suggestions. Now, he had this kind of bizarre idea that we had this mysterious fluid that was running through our bodies, and that through his mesmeric power, he could manipulate it, right? This was his idea, and then he could heal people from all manner of maladies, right? Well, Mesmer was later accused of being a fraud. But the fascination with mesmerism continued. And in fact, scientists began to do some experiments on it. They started studying this and experimenting, putting people in a trance-like state, a receptive state, and giving them suggestions that would cause physical phenomena to occur, like raising blisters on their skin, or altering blood flow, or altering circulation, or altering digestion, those kinds of things. And in fact, one guy, a Scottish scientist, in fact, by the name of James Braid, he was doing these experiments, and he came to the conclusion that, this is a real thing. This is a real phenomena, but it's not because it's some mysterious fluid. He came to the conclusion that it's the power of suggestion. The power of suggestion. First time we really realize, wow, our thoughts are powerful. The power of suggestion. He's the one that called it hypnotism. And he also understood that we could do this ourselves. We could put ourselves in a receptive frame of mind and give ourselves suggestion, therefore, discovering self-hypnosis. Right? So, now, this is when Phineas P. Quimby comes on to the scene. How's that for a name, right? Phineas P. Quimby. Well, Phineas happened to attend one of these demonstrations of mesmerism or hypnotism in New England, and it really caught his imagination. He was like, wow, I want to know more. So he studied everything he could about it, became a master, and opened his own practice. Now, hypnotism eventually kind of gave way to what became known as mind cure. He called it mind cure. And he writes in his book, man is made up of truth and belief. And if he is deceived into a belief that he has or is liable to have a disease, the belief is catching, and the effect follows it. The belief is catching. See, he was taking this idea that all experience originates in the mind, remember from Buddha. He's putting people in a relaxed frame of mind, helping them get into a relaxed frame of mind, and helping them focus, really laser focus on the truth of wholeness, and really helping them to really understand and embody the truth that wholeness is their innate nature. And once they were completely convinced of that, the illness resolved itself and health was revealed. So Quimby was a success. He was a hit. People came to him from all over, hundreds of people. He claimed to be healed, using this technique. And one of the probably most famous person who came to him for healing and who later studied with him was none other than Mary Baker Eddy, who later completely denied that she had been healed by him, completely denied that she studied with him, completely dissed this guy, and said, I alone have discovered this technique of mind cure. And she took this and sort of blended it with Christian healing and found this little organization called Christian Science. Actually, the first woman, got to give her credit, first woman to start a church, I mean, she must have run up against all kinds of stuff. So now, Christian Science is not New Thought, but, they have the same roots, obviously, similar roots. And I think probably the thing that distinguishes the difference the most, two things, and you probably heard that Christian Science doesn't allow medical intervention. Like all healing has to be prayer alone. Whereas in New Thought, we know that medical treatment is just one avenue that healing is facilitated. I mean, shifting consciousness is primary, but medical treatment, homeopathy, changing your diet, whatever, those are just ways that healing is facilitated. The other thing is that Christian Science is a pretty closed system. It's like, you really can't have any other input other than what Mary Baker Eddy has said. And of course, New Thought, open at the top, right? We're constantly growing and evolving, which is necessary because our consciousness is constantly growing and evolving. That's what we're talking about with a newer thought. A newer thought. So, now, towards the end of Quimby's life, another gentleman comes on the scene by the name of Warrenfeld Evans. And Warrenfeld Evans said, you know what, we got to start putting this down. We got to start writing it down. And so he began to kind of pull from these different sources, synthesize these different ideas, including what Quimby had accomplished, and a working system began to emerge. And so he writes in one of his books, that which we need most, that which we most need, is to develop in consciousness our inner and higher life, and to give to what rightly belongs to it, an absolute sovereignty over all below it. It should be our aim to elevate the principle of thought above the plane of the senses and free it from their distorting influence. So you see how he's kind of tying together Eastern thought there at the beginning, maybe even sort of, mystical teachings of Jesus. And at the end, it sounds a little more like Plato's theory of forms, that distorting influence of the senses, right? So now we've got this philosophy, this growing philosophy that really begins to feel like a movement. And it's got a name now, New Thought. It's New Thought. And perhaps the person most responsible for making sure that this was a growing movement, really spreading the word, was Emma Curtis Hopkins. Why do they all have three names? Emma Curtis Hopkins, Mary Baker Eddy, Warrenfeld Evans, Victoria Loveland-Coen. It's a trend. So Emma Curtis Hopkins gets her start by studying with Mary Baker Eddy. She's a student. In fact, she is, an excellent student, and they start giving her leadership roles in the organization. Well, eventually she wants to explore her own ideas. And Mary Baker Eddy was like, no, we're not doing that. So she had to leave, move to Chicago and start her own school. She started her own school. And again, her practice, her school was thriving. Many, many people came and were healed by her. But that wasn't enough. That didn't, it didn't want to stop there. She had a goal of making sure that this movement took off, that it spread, that this became a movement. So she encouraged her patients to become students, really learn this, really know it inside and out, and start to teach it. Take it out into all parts of the country. Start your own spiritual community, start your own organization, and, teach these amazing principles. And so the list of people who studied with her are like a who's who of people from New Thought. The Ricks sisters and Melinda Kramer, who took these ideas and formed Divine Science and took it to the West Coast. Nona Brooks took it, also sort of Divine Science, took it to Colorado. Emily Cady, who we have read from her book, Lessons in Truth, many times here. That book, Lessons in Truth, was published by the Fillmores. She was also a student. And speaking of the Fillmores, Myrtle and Charles Fillmore were students. And in fact, Myrtle Fillmore, that famous affirmation that led to the healing of her tuberculosis, she got from a student of Emma Curtis Hopkins, E.B. Weeks, who gave her that affirmation, I am a child of God, therefore I do not inherit illness. Let's say that together. I am a child of God, therefore I do not inherit illness. It's like a denial affirmation all in one. She worked with it. She worked it. And then her healing inspired her husband, Charles, and together they formed Silent Unity to use this powerful affirmative prayer idea to pray for many, many others who would write them from all over the world for prayer. And that eventually became Unity. The most successful New Thought organization, really. Religious Science or Centers for Spiritual Living is a close second, and Ernest Holmes, who founded that, also studied with Emma Curtis Hopkins later on in her life. She was advanced, in years, but still very sharp and probably more mystical. You can kind of see that influence his writings. So Emma Curtis Hopkins, like many New Thought practitioners, pioneers in the day, embraced the metaphysical teachings of Jesus as opposed to the religion about Jesus. And, you can kind of, when you read her stuff, you can sort of see a lot of the Christian language in it, although she does use female pronouns to refer to God on occasion, which I think is very cool. She, again, transcendentalists and New Thought pioneers were early feminists. And she definitely was. But you can also see the influence of Eastern thought and mystical thought infused in her writings, as reflected in this passage. And again, it's in your handout if you want to follow along. The Eastern mystic repeats the word Om by drawing in his breath and speaking the word 12 times. Then he holds his breath and repeats the word 24 times. Finally, he feels that he himself is Om. To feel that Om is your substance, your life, your mind, is greater than to feel that the words you say are Om. The only words you can speak and be identified with wisely are, I am my own understanding of God. I am my own understanding of God. What does that mean? Let's look at that. So while we are in truth Om, God expressing, we experience that only to the degree of our understanding. I mean, if we just are catching glimpses here and there of our divine identity, of who we truly are, but most of the time we're thinking of ourselves as only human. And our language kind of reflects ideas of separation, that we're limited, that we're separate from others, we're separate from our God, we're, subject to the winds of fate, that kind of thing. That's our experience. That is how we show up in life. But on the other hand, the more that we embrace and embody this idea that I am this I am, that Om, God, is my substance, my mind, my life. The more we open to that and embrace that and breathe that and live with that, the more that shows up in our experience. And so, New Thought pioneers, they understood that our work is really to increase our understanding of who we truly are. That's number one, to increase our understanding of who we truly are. And then number two, the second thing is to claim it, is to call forth those divine qualities into our experience, the divine qualities of peace, guidance, love, joy, harmony, abundance, to claim it and to call it forth into our experience. And that's the working system. That's really the core of it. So I'm going to close with a passage from Lessons in Truth. Right? Emily Cady's Lessons in Truth. That really kind of speaks to this. That gives this sort of practical application of these spiritual truths. One of the unerring truths in the universe is that there is already provided a lavish abundance for every human want. In other words, the supply of every good always awaits the demand. Another truth is that the demand must be made before the supply can come forth to fill it. To recognize these two statements of truth and to affirm them are the whole secret of understanding faith. Faith based on principle. Faith based on principle. So again, these ideas, these passages are included in the handout. Take them home this week. Pick one and meditate on it. You really see how that can open you up. And then the next time I speak, I'm going to continue this exploration into where we're going with this. What is the evolution of this? Where is this taking us? Where are we going? Where are we headed? In the meantime, breathe it in, sit with it, open to it, dwell in it. Namaste. Namaste.